If you are listening to this podcast, then you are likely a business owner, an aspiring entrepreneur, or at the forefront of innovation within a growing company. Think back to before you became those things, before you were the one creating jobs and instead were the one applying for them. Here's an awkward, usually avoided, impolite question. How much did you make? Here's a deeper, even more uncomfortable question. Did you get paid what you were actually worth?
There's a woman who literally found out her colleague was making $30K more than her, and she was in there longer. And she had that information and she sat on it for like 2 months, just not knowing what to do with it. When we talk about wage transparency and salary, the data is a piece of it, but then what are we doing to transition people to a better space?
That's Cynthia Medina Carson, founder and CEO of Wager, a company that is helping create the space for individuals and businesses to have a more open dialogue about pay. As an employee, the benefits of salary transparency are relatively apparent. More transparency equals more fair pay. But as an employer, the conversation around pay is an often avoided one. Cynthia is here to tell you that it shouldn't be that way, and that for a competitive, growing business that is trying to retain and recruit top talent, salary and promotion transparency are the way of the future. There are always exciting things happening in the world of small business. The news that grabs the headlines, though, are always the highlights, the overnight successes, the billion-dollar IPOs, the massive exits. But just like your Instagram feed, that's never the whole story. Let's look deeper than the headlines and the press photos. Underneath all of that is the real work building something valuable and lasting. Don't get me wrong, I love crazy success stories and can be drawn into those big flashy tales just as much as the next person. But we all know that what's more important than the destination is how you get there. It's the struggles you have to overcome and the insights you learn along the way that make you who you are. So those are the stories we're telling. It's raw, it's honest, and maybe it's exactly what you need to hear. I'm Hillary Georgie, and this is The Journey. From an outsider's perspective, Cynthia's journey seems anything but linear. Her life growing up hardly reflects how she lives today. But it's those early experiences that taught her resiliency, to dream big, and to think beyond her current box.
I didn't grow up with a lot of money, right? And my parents were really, really good people, but they just kind of let me off in the world. Not having boundaries growing up, I don't have the same hangups when it comes to money. So I did very well in certain times in my life where I've made over, $200K working in recruiting and tech recruiting. I've made $200 a month working in the Peace Corps. What I found and what I feel like the biggest luxury in the United States and in life is the ability to do what you want when you want it, how you want it. That is reserved for a few. And that was been always my mission. So doing the right thing, what I want to do, when I wanted to do it. And now I think I'm in a position where I can take that, all that I've learned and all that information, take a moment and be like, okay, how can I make the biggest impact given what I've known, what I've done? I went from a career of doing policy, executive in the banking industry to now starting my own business. I had nothing and now I'm the only person my family's gone to, graduate degree from Harvard. If a person like me can't step up and do this next level leadership and take a risk, who can?
Cynthia has had a long track record of working hard and creating a path for herself. She had big goals and quickly learned where to go and what questions to ask in order to achieve them. That drive and motivation was derived from a deep understanding of what she was worth to her employees and colleagues. But she quickly realized that not everyone had the same understanding of their price tag.
When I sat across the table and I was doing recruiting and I was in negotiations, I would be with a person who was younger, less experienced, and they were just about to blow it. They were going to ask for $20,000 less than they could have made. And I just kept seeing that over and over. And I'm like, this is wrong. There's something about this whole dynamic that's off. So I did start sharing with people what they should make. I gave them their salary ranges and I started saying, hey, you're asking too much or you're asking too little. You actually are in this space. I felt like, all right, I'm going to take all I've learned. This actually matters so much to me. And I'm kind of getting angry about this. The system's not set up for people to succeed. It's definitely not set up for people of color to succeed or women to succeed. And if we're looking forward to the next 30, 40, 50 years of what the workforce looks like, we need to start instituting the policies and the framework and how we talk to people now, because the people who are going to start doing it right will be at the head of the curve, and the people who are doing it wrong are going to disappear.
The problem isn't that employees don't want to make more or that employees don't want to give fair wages. The problem is that no one was having these conversations to help either side determine what was fair. It was an issue that Cynthia was passionate about, and an issue that became her jumping off point into entrepreneurship.
I started by pairing individuals in similar industries to have salary talks and shares. We did that for a few hundred people. And what we've grown to is now doing workshops in companies to get them to have open conversations with their employees on these very important topics. We've done a really good job word of mouth in terms of helping people individually. And what we're seeing is there'll be an employee resource group, right? Where I've helped a couple people, maybe an African-American woman. And she's like, gosh, there's all these women in my company would love to hear this message. This is basically me saying, how do you guys talk to your managers? How do you create a relationship? How are you managing your career in a way that you can talk about money, not be so fearful, and make it a win-win for the managers? So, that's how it usually comes bottom up. This is not something top down.
Cynthia started by opening up a dialogue among individuals in similar industries and positions. She saw those conversations trickle their way up the ladder to managers and executives. And for those folks, the pitch for why these workshops and talks matter from their perspective was pretty simple.
Talent's leaving. People talk about the gig economy or contractor employees. There is not a sense of the person's not going to be there for more than 2 to 4 years for either direction. The company is not committing to you forever, and now no longer a person can commit to that company forever. It takes forever to find someone. They finally started, 3 months in, you're like, oh, great. And then you want to see that person leave in a year, they're going to leave. If you haven't done your job to keep them.
On one side, employees aren't carving out career paths within companies, and on the other side, employers aren't creating individualized and incentivized structures for employees to follow. It's a lose-lose situation. And that's why it's so important for employers to help start those transparent conversations.
They need to kind of get in front of this and understand their messaging, understand what people are saying and why they're saying it, not be afraid of it, but kind of like, what are we doing? What's happening? There's a change in the workforce where people are talking about money more openly. There's more salary conversations. What are we doing to be part of the conversation? Because if we're not part of the conversation, we're just going to get the repercussions.
And those repercussions extend far beyond higher turnover. They also contribute to pay discrepancies between genders and ethnicities. According to Cynthia, one study conducted by Salesforce provides a clear demonstration of what this looks like in action.
They did a reevaluation of all their salaries. They found a discrepancy, and they shrank that discrepancy, paid millions of dollars to shore it up. And what they found is a few years later, they redid the analysis. Discrepancy started cropping up again. Hiring and money distribution is subjective.
For Cynthia, salary transparency is not just about shedding the stigma of talking about pay. It's also about creating space for honest conversations about equal pay. After the break, Cynthia explains what this means, where these discrepancies rise, and how employees and employers can come together to help fix them.
As part of Salesforce's continued commitment to small businesses, they've recently announced Salesforce Care for Small Business, a combination of free products to help during the COVID-19 crisis. New customers will get 3 months free access to out-of-the-box CRM Salesforce Essentials and Analytics Solution Tableau, as well as 6 months free access to collaboration tool Quip. Now, more than ever, small businesses need the right tools to connect with their customers. Salesforce is here to help. To learn more, visit salesforce.com/thejourney.
What's the first step toward getting what you want? Knowing to ask for it. And in today's culture and throughout history, the type of people who ask for that raise or that promotion or those extra benefits often follow a pattern.
Often what I'm seeing is the people who are good at negotiating get money. There are people who press and people who don't. And then those buckets start looking pretty similar, right? So men tend to press more, women tend to press less. Women are grateful for what they have, and men are like, this is good, but I could do better. And I believe that just starts creeping up. Women don't ask as much. Men will say 70% of the time will ask, maybe women to 30 to 40%. So if men are asking more and men are pushing more, women are asking less or not at all, that you're going to get what you got, which goes back to, what are we doing differently that we've not done before? Women don't ask. I know they don't ask. They're fearful of asking. They're afraid of the answer when they don't ask. They're afraid of the rejection of not getting what they want, but they're not asking. So you're not going to get the raise. And that's what it's going to look like. We're going to set women and men on different trajectories to make less.
The fear of asking or being quick to accept what is offered might sound like an employee-driven problem, i.e., employees need to find the wherewithal to release fear and dream big. And while that is true to an extent, it's not that simple, because unfortunately, that fear is not unfounded.
So when I see women, there's definitely a lot of fear about being too loud, fear about being too much, fear about just too much of something. It does play out. You'll see some statistics and some research saying, when women come off, too strong, too bold, they get kind of pushed back. Their ability to move up in the ranks kind of is a little deflated. You do see that often. So it's not just a fear that it'll happen, it actually happens.
Our world is riddled with implicit biases. How we perceive others is often skewed by our own perceptions. Perceptions that we may not even consciously have played a role in establishing. That's why it's so important for employers to work alongside employees to help them root out those biases in a data-driven way.
I know from my experience in giving workshops to people, specifically people of color and professionals of color, they don't feel like they're being seen in the workforce. They feel like their same product, same discussion feels a little angrier when it comes from them, feels a little less friendly. Their process of how they talk and do isn't the same. There's a true lack of understanding how a person sees the world, how this person is seeing the world. There's all this stuff playing in a person's head that when you are giving them, their end of year evaluation, you're missing something. And they're like, well, yeah, they're good, but not that good. There's just a disconnect with what they're presenting and who they are to what people are seeing.
In Cynthia's opinion, correcting pay discrepancies isn't solely the job of the individual or solely the job of the business. The solution requires both parties to work together.
I approach people saying, listen, you want to keep people, you want to have healthy conversations, but you also want your workforce to kind of manage themselves. Like you don't have time to hold everyone's hand. Little self-management of individuals, I kind of bridge that gap where no one's going to come up to you and say, I want $200,000 more. Like that's not realistic and that's kind of silly. How do you start having conversations so everyone can manage expectations? Expectations are huge, I think. So managing expectations and managing career growth and kind of just managing a process where you're communicating enough where everyone knows where they stand.
Figuring out where you stand is scary because the answer may not always be what you want to hear. But while rejection hurts in the short term, resentment damages your career and working relationships even more in the long term.
When I push people why they really don't do something, like why they don't really ask and why they don't press, if you've been promised 6 months you're going to get a bump and you haven't gone, what is really holding you back? People actually don't want to know. People don't want to be rejected. They want that money to pop up into their bank account and have it had happened. If you have been waiting for something to happen differently and you haven't really changed, you are going to get resentful. If you're not moving forward, if you're not doing the things that you think that you living up to your potential, there's going to be resent. I think what's important about that is putting it on people as well. I think managers are overloaded. I think there's so much being placed on their expectations. So this is a way to kind of like put it on people's laps. Like, what are you doing? How are you managing yourself in terms of your career? And how are you making this, you're a part of this kind of big cog, not just waiting for someone to do something for you.
Today's world is one of information. We can only ever expect more knowledge, more data, more transparency, never less. Cynthia predicts that in the future, there will be more data around salaries, and that will help empower people on both sides to make more informed decisions.
Change in the workforce, it's going to require more access to information that has been huddled around certain people. There are people who have not had access to the information generationally, and you just can't build a workforce with people blind. My hope and goal is to create hundreds and hundreds of mini salary transparent networks where everyone amongst themselves is sharing specific information that matters to them. There was a baristas in Philadelphia and they created a salary sheet amongst themselves, hundreds and hundreds of people really putting in not just their data of them, how much they made, but who got injured on the job, how they got injured, how people are treated. And that just kind of became like a wow. And you see those type of information where you're not just putting numbers, it's also putting the human piece and how that's integrated and how those numbers matter. And if you have hundreds and hundreds of people kind of giving those stories and those numbers, you start to have a better picture. And that kind of unleashes people to make better decisions and kind of take action for themselves.
Open source knowledge and employer support are two large components of the equation. But the key to it all is being able to overcome one thing: fear.
Don't be fearful. If you are happy with where you're at, great. If you're not, then do something different.
We can all do better. And as entrepreneurs and small business owners building the future workforce, It's important to have these conversations now, not 5 years and several hundred employees later. Those in charge today have the power to affect the fate of people tomorrow, and they can positively impact their employees' wealth and overall happiness with a few simple conversations. They may be hard and awkward, but ultimately, like those all-star employees, they're worth it. As Anne Mulcahy, the former CEO and chairwoman of Xerox Corporation said, quote, "Employees are a company's greatest asset. They're your competitive advantage. You want to attract and retain the best. Provide them with encouragement, stimulus, and make them feel that they are an integral part of the company's mission."
Today's uncertain business climate makes it critical to stay in touch with your customers and employees. That's why Salesforce recently announced Salesforce Care for Small Business, a combination of free products to help businesses during the COVID-19 crisis. New customers will get 3 months free access to out-of-the-box CRM, Salesforce Essentials, and analytics solution Tableau, as well as 6 months free access to collaboration tool Quip. Salesforce is here to help you stay connected. To learn more, visit salesforce.com/thejourney.